like to welcome on to this episode of Boxing is Love, Jason Scalzo. Jason, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to me.
My absolute pleasure. I've been listening to you guys for a while. It's a pleasure to be on your platform.
Well, this episode for us is all about getting to know you as an individual, what your role is within the sport of boxing, but also we're going to be talking about what I mentioned there, boxing is love, and your involvement in that and what that is all about. So this is going to be really good to hear from yourself what boxing in love is all about. So I'd like to just go back to you first and foremost, though, and talk about where your beginnings came from within the sport and how you've got yourself into the position that you're now in.
Yeah, so my involvement in boxing started at a very young age. I was 8 years old, and I remember hearing stories of my grandfather talking about Rocky Marciano and Willie Pep. And then I got older, and I fell in love with Muhammad Ali and the impact that he had on his constituency. And I never stopped thinking about it. And it was I attribute boxing to quite a bit of my happiness in childhood. Where I excelled was in Taekwondo, and I was on the U.S. national Taekwondo team. I fought internationally for close to a decade. And then I took a bit of a hiatus to go to college, and found myself pursuing a career in corporate America, starting a family. And at around 35 years old, went through a very acrimonious divorce that left me in a pretty dark spot. And that spot took me back to the gym. And when I was back in the boxing gym and I found myself at home once again, that happiness that I was so longing for started to return. And as I continued to pursue, I dabbled with some amateur fights. I did pretty well, but I realized that it was helping me here. And by virtue of that, if it helps me here, it can help a lot of people here. And about, I'd say, less than a year later, I was offered a promotion for vice president of some sales, blah, 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 that, instinctively I took. And then upon the drive from my office to my home, I decided that I can't do this. And it came around the same time that I was focusing on developing the Liberia project, where my girlfriend, now fiance at the time, Tori, was more inspired by the fact that I'd be willing to quit this job to pursue this than actually taking the job. So what ended up coming of this was a 3-year journey to create what is intended to be the greatest and most sustainable boxing charitable organization this planet has ever seen.
It's safe to say that combat sports have always been a fixture and fitting of your life, given what you explained there, and you've been in and out of various sports, something that you've really enjoyed doing. But
Yes.
when you went back to the gym for that first time, you talked about the differences that were in your life at the time. But just explain to me and the listeners, like what was it the first time you walked back in that kind of made you change your mindset about where you
Yeah.
wanted to go with it?
It came from this sense of finding happiness, right? I was so much longing for happiness that instead of, it was literally the boxing gym that I ended up at was literally next door to the beer cave. And my plan was to really drink myself to sleep that night, and maybe even that entire weekend. But I happened to be in gym clothes, and it was just about 6 o'clock in the evening, and there was a class that was starting, and it was open gym. And I felt the happiness that, from wrapping my hands. I felt the happiness from banging on the bag. And I started to remember these things that my grandfather told me about Marciano, Brockton, Massachusetts. His dad was a shoemaker. Willie Pep from Connecticut, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And then I remember just these little clips of the more obscure people, like watching, I just remember the feeling of Ike Corte fighting Oscar De La Hoya and Julio Cesar Chavez and his reign at 89-0. Like all these things started flooding back to my mind, and I was feeling that happiness that was just gone for a period of time. And it motivated me to get better every single day, not just at the sport, but in life. It was something that, like, I woke up happy to do. got me prepared for work, got me prepared for any social issues that I had to deal with as a result. And it just allowed me to experience what was missing in my life for the first time in a long period of time. So it just started with trying to grasp happiness. And when I found it, I didn't want to let it go.
What was the experience like for you becoming an amateur boxer and getting involved in that side of the sport? I know you mentioned earlier about your competitive side of yourself and being involved in Taekwondo for a number of years, but then going and transitioning into the sport of boxing, totally different.
Yeah.
You're not using your legs
Well,
for offense anymore. You're using them to use for footwork to set your
for
shots up.
balance and
Yeah.
structure. Yeah, exactly. So when I was younger, I really did excel in Taekwondo, and it was something that um, uh, I cared very much about. But boxing was the most triumphant of the combat sports as far as I'm concerned. And when we were younger, I would spar with the kids in the boxing gym, and I'd go to the local boxing gym and work with those kids and see the difference at the balance and the footwork. Luckily, as by the time I was 35 years old, by virtue of just repeated injuries, my legs just couldn't, get past my hips. Right. I mean, that's just the nature of life.
Yeah.
So I was able to use that as my roots. Right. So I built my strength in my legs back up to serve as roots. And then the trunk came from my tree. I always tell my kids, we're growing a tree. So the roots are my feet, my core is my trunk, and the branches are my arms. And you can't have one without the other. So I use that to use the balance and the structure and the movement and that swing and the head movement that allowed every aspect of my body to be engaged, including my mind. And that transition came so seamlessly. One, I couldn't kick anymore. And two, I was so focused on learning the craft that those sparring sessions it was just like a master's degree program for me, because I wanted to know how to retrain my brain to use just my hands and to move my head and be elusive and maximize my defense versus, kicking my way out of a situation.
Did you ever consider the prospect of maybe turning professional? Was that ever on the horizon
No,
at any point? No.
no. I mean, it was never that. I got, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I had a fiance who didn't love the idea of me getting my face bashed in every Wednesday, Friday night that I would go. And, as much as I came out pretty much unscathed, professional fighting was never something that was in the forefront of my mind. It was a mental health tool, to be
Yeah.
quite honest, Sean. It was a tool that I used to get me out of the funk that I was in, to get me out of fight or flight, that feeling of constant anxiety. Now, if you define, depression, you define it based on that dwelling on what happened yesterday. And if you define anxiety, it's that worry about what's happening tomorrow. What boxing did was kept me in the moment. I had to focus in those 2-3 minute rounds that if that bell rang and I wasn't on my back, I had to get out somehow. Right. So it kept me in the moment and it allowed me to be focused. And that transitioned into my professional career and my motivation to pursue the sport in its entirety. As I researched, more and more, and of course you hear the stories and you do all the you have the little anecdotes of the fighters that had some difficult situations. The sport needed somebody who cared a lot. And most notably the people that cared a lot about the people that were fighting. And that's kind of the niche that I felt like I fell into. I wasn't worried about profitizing off of the fighter. I was worried about guiding the fighter. And that's what boxing's love kind of evolved into.
So it's a very interesting journey, really, that you've been on so far. And
Mm-hmm.
I know from speaking to you before recording this episode, I can see that the passion's there. You enjoy doing what you're doing, and it isn't just about making money, like you've rightly pointed out. It's about making sure that these fighters are guided along the right path, and that any things that may come up in their career that they're maybe not mature enough to deal with or may never experienced at all before, there's people like you that are there to do that. And there's a lot of fighters that have long since retired that will sit there and say, I wish I had somebody like that guiding my
Yeah.
career for the right reasons in the right way. And this is obviously one of your biggest passions is to do that. So you talked about transitioning into that side of it. What has the experience been like for you getting fighters on board, bringing them together, and then being able to put them into a position where they are getting the right fights at the right time, being
Hmm.
matched with the right people, and also the financial aspect of it for them as well?
Yeah. So what I alluded to earlier was that what makes me a unique asset to professional boxing is how I entered it. And building the Boxing is Love program, the objective is never to identify future champions. It wasn't a talent incubation process. It was to identify ways to foster posterity and create productive adults. By virtue of math, at some point you're going to run into somebody with talent, especially as we expand globally. You're going to find somebody with talent that have come from nothing that could very easily be consumed by the predatorial behavior that this sport sometimes ensues. So what, and it's a good question because I think about it all the time. I've had some really tough experiences in the professional sports, in professional boxing rather, and I've had to learn through the hard way that it's very difficult to affect change at the highest level when those that need it and are most affected don't want it.
Yeah.
Right. So when we're talking about mid-level shows and we're talking about promoters and fighters and the predatorial components of the opponent, which I can talk to for hours, right? I mean, I could talk to that about hours, just these poor lambs that are pulled off the street because they look like they're 140 pounds and they're in for 90 seconds of work, 20 seconds of work, right? Those are the things that I want to eradicate. And there's a place for it in the sport so long as the preparation and it is not monetized solely based on the individual arbiter or the broker, if you will. And those are the lizards and those are the predators that I am looking to take apart systematically. And by extension, I want to take and change the narrative of the sport. You know, when I got into the professional side of things, I told every single one of the fighters that I've signed that I am not the most experienced boxing manager at that particular time. I'm not, but I'm the one that's going to care the most. I'm the one that's going to put you in the best position to succeed at a moral and ethical manner and not put you in front of people that are slimy, that will take advantage of you. Find you opportunities that would advance your career expeditiously, but also with a moral compass that allows you to maintain your own dignity in the process. And there are certain people, names are going to be left out, that are the biggest probably on the planet, people that you would beg to interview maybe, you know, that I fundamentally choose not to do business with because they are criminals. And that's the product of this sport that needs to be regulated. And I'm not saying that I'm this vigilante that's going to do it, but Sean, mark my words, I'm going to turn this sport upside down because I'm the one that's not going to stand for it. And the stronger and my following becomes and the more accomplished my fighters become, they're going to realize that that process works and it can be done the right way. And these fighters could have a future, not maybe in fighting, but they're going to reach their maximum potential. They're going to be guided the right way and they're going to retire with their faculties and comfort to whatever that definition may be.
It's like one of the biggest analogies that I can probably use is like you're chipping away at this giant iceberg that's in the Alaskan Sea, and you're the one that's trying to chip away
Yeah.
at all these big time promoters, these big time managers that have these relationships and this reputation to go with it as well, and you're kind of taking on a huge challenge, and some might turn around to you and say, and you probably have already had this before, well, you haven't got a chance of being able to put a dent in the mountain that these guys have already built with what they've already
Mhm.
got and what they've already established. But you have got a completely different mindset. You're coming at it from a completely different angle. It's not a case of you're trying to make the most profit or you're trying to be the cash grab and get these guys and use them as the cash cows and then basically discard them, which is what you do see a lot, and you know that. You see all these guys get used and abused and thrown out on the street and basically left to fend for themselves. after the career is gone, and the amount of fighters that have been and gone, and you see the state of what they've been left in because of mismanagement, poor promoters, people basically using and abusing them to get their own gain out of it. But for you, it's a different angle. It's a completely different way of thinking
Yeah.
about how these things can go about. So with all that in mind, there's a lot of challenges that lie ahead
Yeah.
for you with that. So how do you overcome them challenges that are put out in front of you?
So to the names of the promoters, the big, the small, the indifferent, that want to challenge my approach, I tell them that I simply do not care. And I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to do it anyway because I was taught at a young age that the cream rises to the top. And at some point, when you surround yourself with the right people and you vet out those that are incapable of conforming and you move along from them, you realize that a movement can take place. Revolution is not something that's easily attained, but revolution is what makes change. And if you can say right now, this isn't me boasting on my own self, but I can tell you right now, we have a database of thousands of individuals that are prepared for that revolution. And that revolution is to take the sport of boxing. We're going to change the narrative of it. And we're going to create the sense of opportunity. And we're going to create the sense of encouragement and sportsmanship that has never been seen before, whether it be through Boxing is Love, whether it be through my management company and the way my fighters perform and act on or in and outside of the ring, or the platforms and the content that we create as a result of these stories to be consumed. Because, the thing about boxing, if you're a casual fighter or if you're a casual fan of boxing, it's not what drives you to the sport is not necessarily the main events. It's that training. It's that montage, like the Rocky movies of him running up the stairs. It's those are what is the catalyst of triumph, right? And if we can put more of an emphasis on that moving forward and less about the duffel bags full of money and the $70 pay-per-views, and put a card together top to bottom of people that genuinely do it the right way and surround ourselves with people that genuinely do it the right way, it's going to happen. It's going to be a slow trickle, but it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen on the big broadcasts, fine. I don't want to work with them anyway, and I don't need to work with them. They have to, there's a term in a book, the Art of War, the book, The Art of War. So there's a term called flanking that they use. And flanking is something that I've done my entire career. You identify the enemy and they feel as though they have a stronghold. And instead of going right at them, you build up so large around them that you essentially collapse on top of them. And right now I'm in the beginning process of flanking those naysayers that think that this thing can't be changed at the biggest and the smallest level. I will flank you and I'm going to collapse on top of you. And I'm not saying me specifically, I'm saying this organization and the meaning of this organization will collapse on top of you. You have no other choice but to conform.
What's your ultimate ambition then, as a manager, as someone who promotes fighters? Where do you want to essentially take your fighters? The easiest answer would be to make them all into world champions. I know that, but I know that
That's not practical.
no, it's not. There's some fighters that are gonna make it to the top, and there's some that may not. So for you, doing that balancing act between the fighters that do and the fighters that don't, ultimately, what would be your sort of middle ground ambition to see for these fighters?
It's to be honest with the fighter in the very beginning and identify collectively with their team what their maximum potential is. You and I both know that there's an inverse relationship between talent and opportunity, between exposure and revenue, or income rather. So if I sign an Olympian that gets a deal with Top Rank or Matchroom right off the bat, their road is going to be a lot different than somebody who came out of the pro or the amateurs for a short period of time and just they want to fight. So my job as manager is to objectively assess what their maximum potential is, and then set goals, milestones that will allow them to reach systematically advancing their career as a way and a process to meet their maximum potential. That maximum potential could be a 20-10 career. but they're healthy and they had an opportunity to win mid-level belts. That opportunity could be a couple shots at a world title. That opportunity could be a world title. But as long as we objectively recognize that these goals are in place to define, what the maximum potential is, then we can work together congruently to guide and really start putting those parameters in place for them to reach that maximum potential. Because it would be irresponsible for me to tell every fighter that I sign that they're going to be a world champion.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very clear. I'm going to put them in every position possible to follow the process to improve their ranking, to give them opportunity, provide a platform for them. But I can't look anyone in the eye and say, you're going to be a world champion unless I truly, truly believe it.
So let's move on from what you're doing in terms of the management side, the promoting side, and we've alluded to it throughout the conversation about Boxing is Love, another project that's more dear to your heart than anything that I believe that you're doing. So I'd like you to, for the benefit of everybody that is listening to it, just explain a little bit more about what Boxing is Love is all about.
Yeah, Boxing is Love started with a partnership between Box Raw, the apparel company based out of the UK, and an organization called Save More Kids. And Save More Kids is an organization that develops sustainable opportunity for children in Liberia. Boxing is Love was a t-shirt and a concept that was developed by Box Raw. I developed the Liberia project. When we came together, we realized that there were such strong synergies that the collective agreement was that Boxing is Love was to be defined by the project that we underwent in Liberia. What we have done in 2 years in Liberia is we started. Now, understand, Liberia didn't have boxing prior to us being there. They had a program, but it was well underfunded, no facilities, nothing. The majority of the country had no outlet to boxing or no opportunity to access it. So we put a group of volunteers together on multiple occasions over a 3-year period of time. And we built an infrastructure of youth boxing as a mechanism of empowerment to build a culture of courage that these children that are either rehabilitated child soldiers or victims of a 2-decade-long civil war and Ebola outbreak that have no sportsman idol, with the exception of George Weah, who I'm sure your listeners know quite a bit about. But to an entire generation, he's only known as their president. He's not known as the footballer that was as successful as he was. So part of this is the process is we identify a credible partner, which was Save More Kids, a symbol, which had by extension become Freddie Kiewit, who is a Liberian-born middleweight fighter based out of the UK. And we create a sustainable youth program where people from around the world can get behind and come visit, share their talents, and eventually accumulate enough resources to build facilities that serve not only as a gym, but as a dormitory for people from around the world. That database I referenced earlier are volunteers that want to come from 37 countries and 42 states just to come and volunteer to give their Boxing is Love definition to these kids. And as that has scaled, and of course with quarantine hitting it, which has impacted our ability to travel, inevitably we had to pivot. We have to innovate. And there are so many ideas that have kind of come just by virtue of being stuck in my house for 3 months that is going to take the meaning of these 3 words and allow it to evolve. So we have collaborations in place with some notable fighters, some huge notable fighters, that when we decided to go global, we decided to believe and feel that Boxing is Love can impact every country on the planet. Our goal shifted from being, while still putting the resources towards the Liberia project to relegate it just to Liberia, to being the boxing equivalent to UNICEF and reaching out and having a presence all over the world. And there are certain icons in the sport that need to be a part of the organization as gatekeepers or as a way of accessing certain markets. So the goal is to expand from West Africa, throughout West Africa, to parts of Latin America, to Southeast Asia, to Canada, to different areas. Again, allowing that partnership to define what it is that the boxing is love means. So in Liberia, it's the introducing of the sport to create opportunity. In Mexico, it's the celebration of past champions. It's the celebration of the sport to bring people back to the gym, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of things in the works that are going to allow for this brand, this logo, this mission to advance, considerably, despite the quarantine and the pandemic concerns.
This personally for you must be one of the most fulfilling tasks that you've got on your hand. Hearing you speak about it so passionately, speaks volumes to me as a human being, that there are people out there that really want to help people in a completely different way of life that they have, and the way they are. Some people are born into poverty, unfortunately, and we know how bad that can be in all different areas of the world. And sport is one of the things that, or one of the facilitators that brings a lot of us together, no matter what race, no matter what religion we are. It brings us all together, even if it is just for a moment. It brings us all together, and for you to be able to enable that and be part of a project like that must, from a personal perspective, surely, I know even me speaking about it, not being involved in it, it kind of gives me goosebumps to think. I can imagine
I appreciate that.
I can imagine the impact this will have on a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, and again, it's not in the context of a talent incubation. It's not in the context of creating champions. It's elected officials, it's attorneys, it's teachers, it's people that don't have to beg in the side of the street. It's just that encouragement that is so lacking in certain communities. Now there are communities all around the world, whether it's the first world or the developing world, that have pervasive social epidemics, generational cycles of dependency that they feel like they have to kind of fall into. And all throughout the world, you have these community boxing facilities that have saved generations of children from hardships. They've given them opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have. And to me, with everything going on with the civil unrest that's been taking place over the course, there's nothing to me that is more applicable right now in the sport of boxing. Because in my mind, boxing is punctuated by inclusion. And it doesn't matter what I look like, where I'm from, what color my skin is. When you're standing across the ring from somebody, everything has to do with how you prepared to improve yourself every single day prior to getting into the ring. And sportsmanship really excels at that moment. And that's where I think the bridging the cultural gaps take place, when push comes to shove, about, the sport in and of itself, more so than any sport, I believe, that exists in this world. And it's that powerful of a feeling that I have, that I cannot stop thinking about the effect that this can have on so many people. And it's not about, it's not about a brand. It's not about one individual person. It's about the collective cohesion that can take place as a result of these communities and cultures coming together at the time they need it the most.
It's great to hear that, with relation to what your ambitions are for Boxing is Love, that it's to have this impact on it. And I'm glad that you kind of put a bit of context to what it is all about, so that people do understand that, it isn't to nurture people. It isn't to kind of scout people from different parts of the world and have them as professional fighters, or see the potential. And you kind of, in a way, you was alluding to the fact of the previous conversation about the promoters and the managers that kind of do use people. I can imagine that someone using this type of a project would use it for that purpose.
Exactly.
It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. So
at the same time, Sean, what we've come across are dozens of very notable high-level fighters that want to give back to the community, but they risk exploitation and they risk having to be asked to give a bunch of money. So as another arm to this program is that if you're a professional fighter out there that want to give back to their country, that wants to give back to their communities, and you don't necessarily have the acumen to do it or the knowledge to do it. That's where Boxing is Loves comes in, because I've started four nonprofit organizations in my life. I've raised over $4 million in capital
Wow.
revenue that have gone 100% to the programs that we've launched, all through recreation and with child wellness as the narrative. But if you're a fighter that is looking to return to their country, if you're a fighter that is looking to maybe have something evaluated contractually or something along those lines, we have those resources in place. We have an infrastructure of notable individuals that want to help fighters just as much as we want to help them. So that's a safe haven that, I mean, I don't care if you're Anthony Joshua or you're a kid turning pro, we will be able to provide you the resources and the guidance, to execute whatever philanthropic goals you may have in your career. And that's something that a lot of people can't say that they can do. And it would be under their banner. We would be off in the side steps, just helping boots in the ground type stuff. But I think you find that there's a lot of people that want to help, that they just don't know how to start.
There is one conversation that we haven't had yet. There's a lot of projects that you're involved in. There's one project that has come to the forefront most recently, and it's in relation to a network that you're involved in. And I'd like to know a little bit more about it, because I've only heard minor details about it. It sounds quite exciting, but for the benefit of everybody, including myself, I'd love to know what this is all about and what your plans are and goals are for this.
Yeah, so from the dawn of time, right, from the dawn of boxing, before pay-per-view and before networks have gotten a hold of certain promoters and they struck big deals, the avenue that these fighters have had to take place started at very humble beginnings. Whether you are Marvin Hagler, who started in a high school gymnasium, or Boom Boom Mancini, who started in a high school gymnasium, world champion roads start in very humble beginnings, unless, of course, you have these bigger opportunities or it's been more recent. So the concept with our platform, the platform is called BXNG. So it's Boxing Next Generation. And it's a television live streaming platform that is dedicated to promote the exposure of these prospects at a time where capacity is limited in local halls, where promoters need help generating new revenue, and fighters need more opportunity to build their following. So what has never been done before is creating a production at the quality that you would see on Showtime, on Top Rank, or what have you, in these small hall venues. And it's the foundation of what makes this sport so beautiful, and over time, what we hope to do with the network, currently Boxing Next Generation lives on a larger platform called Vire, and Vire has a channel within there called Vire Sports. That's an app you can get in 92 million US households, 216 countries. The Boxing TV, the Boxing Next Generation, lives within the Vire Sports platform, and it is going to air about 40 pay-per-view events and small hall shows throughout the United States, with the hope of scaling into Mexico, the UK, and various parts of Eastern Europe, and into the former Soviet Union. And it allows for the true fans of these young fighters, the social media following that the guys who have 15 to 40,000 followers that you may never heard of on a household name, but people are willing to pay $14, $15 to watch them fight. And from fight number 1 to fight number 12, there's a fan base that applies to every fight. And it's a remarkable platform. It's got a very modern look. It's very intentionally modern, so we can start to bring in a younger demographic of boxing fan, and we're hoping if we scale globally to access former Olympians, names that you may hear of that are kind of on that cusp of me being signed as a at some of the big promoters. But what you found when you come off of quarantine, there was a surge in supply. Every fighter with a winning record needed a fight.
Yeah.
And what happened was there was a decrease in demand because these local promoters couldn't sell as many tickets. So they couldn't afford the fight or these fighters, and the fighters couldn't afford to get on these cards. So having a platform like this will allow to mitigate that issue where fighters don't have access to cards and promoters can't generate the revenue. So it preserves the sanctity and the importance of these small hall shows. These kids that are on our shows are going through the channels that every single fighter have gone through to reach the highest possible level, but haven't had the ability to generate the following and the exposure as a result. And that's what we're providing to them. And we're doing it with a model that maximizes the opportunity for the local promoters. And we can be very, very selective on which promoters we work with to weed out the scumbags that I choose simply not to work with. And I unapologetically and unequivocally will say that to anybody willing to ask, there are a ton of scumbags out there that I will not work with. So make it be known.
Well, it's one of the biggest things about this age that we live in is, myself and I'm sure yourself come from a completely different era of time where this wasn't even possible. What we can do now to promote the sport, to bring more viewers, more audiences to this particular sport that we love so much is the act of social media, the digitalization of watching fights live, being able to stream fights through your TV, having applications to be able to do that through your mobile phone. The ages
Yeah,
have changed so much that it's opened up so many doors, and a lot of the fights that we have in the UK on the small hall shows, a lot of them don't get televised, and you see some of the best fights you have ever seen
ever seen.
live.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
always the way, and because of the lack of platforms that are given to these fighters to be able to showcase their skills on, to put themselves out on a pedestal, to be able to show these bigger promotions that actually I wouldn't mind getting this fighter onto my show because for one he puts bums on seats, and the viewing
Yeah.
figures and all the demographics that you've been referring to, it brings it all to the forefront. So this project that you're involved in now is giving an opportunity to, like you say, these fighters that are looking for an opportunity to be pushed into the limelight, put a rocket on the back and strap it to them and watch them go. And
100%.
this is what it's
Well
all
said.
about.
Yep. Yeah. And if you think about it, some of the best fighters in the United States are coming from the New York City, New Jersey area.
Yeah.
It is so expensive. It's cost prohibitive to have small shows in those areas, unless you're on an undercard, a top rank show. So they're always going to have to travel, which means they're not going to be much of a ticket generator. And what a lot of these promoters rely on is filling the card with ticket sellers. So strategically, as we scale, we're going to be able to put a card together that at equal parts provides an opportunity for the local fighters to sell as many tickets as the capacity allows. But then these fighters that are coming in from areas like New York or New Orleans or California who aren't having these shows to access their broad market of fans. And it's a win-win. And the model is designed to where as we scale in pay-per-view purchases, select fighters are going to get a kickback on the pay-per-view, which you don't often see at this level, right? You don't often see TV incentivizations unless you're signed with PBC or Top Rank or guys like that. So this is just a value add that we can bring. You couple that with like the very unique design components that we're doing, the modernizing of our and the innovation of what we're bringing to every broadcast. It's changing the way boxing is being consumed at this level. Now, by extension, there are limitations. We come into limitations. A lot of these halls are small halls. They aren't designed for television. But we're in an age, like you said now, where technology is so advanced. If you can put a camera in a doorbell, you can put a camera in a small hall and produce a quality show, as far as I'm concerned. And if we can't do it within the confinements or constraints of our budget, we figure out other ways to do it. We've already come up with some cool lighting concepts that hasn't been seen before. The way that the colors kind of are used to radiate the light. All these things is a working in progress. But it's not without the utility of innovation, and that's what is going to persist these shows, the sport, and it's going to bring younger viewers, younger fans, and it's going to promote these young fighters, and even serve. We're not competing with Top Rank. We're not competing with Showtime or PBC rather. They can't travel as much anymore, so they have guys that they signed that they need to fight. Well, we have cards. We have 40 cards. You want on them? Let's talk. I mean, and we can get them. We can do it to where it meets their contractual obligations, and we can give them a platform. And I would not be surprised. This is a little bit of a wink, wink, tongue in cheek. I would not be surprised if you see some big names on these cards that you wouldn't expect on this level of show because of the reach that this network is creating.
Being a fight fan, first and foremost, for myself, one of the biggest issues that I know a lot of fight fans do have, whether that be hardcore fans, whether that be casual fans, they watch the shows, and I'm giving an example of maybe the Matchroom shows here in the UK. You will get examples of some of these shows where you'll see some of the greatest cards top to bottom, and you think to yourself, when looking at it on paper, these are some very well matched fights, but then you also spin the coin over, and in the same sense, you can get cards where they're literally, top to bottom. Maybe one fight, maybe the main event is probably the most evenly matched fight on the card,
Right.
and then you'll get 4 or 5 fights on the undercard, which are literally prospect versus journeyman. And that is what I think. That's what turns off a lot of fight fans, is that they know what's going to happen, they know what the outcome's going to be, and then you see the reception that you get from cards of where, say, they might only put 4 fights on this one card, but if them 4 fights are evenly matched and you're getting good value for money out of it, people are more inclined to actually want to come back. So the retention on getting them viewers in for say live streams or for pay-per-views is something that must be a challenge, and something that you must be anticipating is going to be a challenge for yourself. So how, being in your position, how do you deal with that aspect of it? What do you do to ensure that these cards that are going on are going to be quite evenly matched, as best they can be, of course, within reason, from top to bottom?
There are a lot of uncontrollable variables. There's fighters that we can go into every show with the expectation or the desire to have 50-50 fights across the board, and then 2 weeks later somebody doesn't get their medicals done, or they fail drug test, or they miss a flight or something like that. Inevitably, then there's a fill-in that comes in last minute where it becomes far more lopsided. Those are variables that you can discern as inevitable or uncontrollable. However, at the same time, we have a responsibility, and we have the good fortune of selectively choosing who we work with. And if we're going to be able to use analytics through our back-end system to know who's generating the most viewership. We're going to be able to work with their management to understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish on this network, so that when the next fight comes, we're not necessarily matching fighters. That's still the promoter's job. We're suggesting who should be in the card, the level, trying to get a certain social media following per card, just strategically. And as we scale, we're going to do that a little bit more. We're going to be more hands-on when it comes to that. But, the matching is something that is difficult, but that's one of the things that means the most to me, because that's where you find that predatorial behavior. That's where you find those guys that are just throwing a bus of kids that they picked up that are 0-5, that haven't gotten out of the first round. And man, I can talk about that forever. Maybe that's for a different show. But they come in there for 30 seconds of work. They make a couple $100, and the guy makes, the guy who brought him here makes thousands, right? That's something that I do not stand for. And that's something that I choose not to be involved with. It's going to happen because, fighters need to fight if people back out. And unfortunately, with, the same variables of the economics of supply and demand, these opponents who are identified as opponents recognize their value now more so than ever. So the people with a 3-10 record, they know that they can ask for more money. It's just they have the cards now. So management and promoters have to recognize that they got to pay a little bit more to mitigate that occurrence. As we scale and as we get more of a following, the resources will be behind us to where we can create inter-network rivalries. We can have these 4-1s and 3-1s and 4-0s and 5-0s that are willing to go at it together, because one, it devalues the need for the because they're going to get constant opportunity. When you have 40 shows on a year and they're bringing in the analytics that they're bringing, there's value to have them on the show, whether they're 4-0 or 5-1. It doesn't matter. We'll be able to identify that. And our job as a platform isn't to cultivate the next 49-0 fighter. It's to give opportunity to people that want to be seen. So that's that's one of the ways we're going to kind of work itself out. And the other component too, if there is a journeyman that is on the card, they didn't start their career as a journeyman, no. Right? They most of the time they started because they felt they had what it took to at least be a successful fighter. And those are the stories that we want to continue to tell. It's opportunity for them. If they can get into a ring and actually show that they've worked out and they're in shape and they know how to box, they deserve just as much of an opportunity. Put them up against a top level prospect, isn't necessarily the right way of doing it, but telling their story, giving them a platform, creating opportunity for them. If they so choose to pursue this career further, then we can provide the opportunity to do that while providing a little bit of a backstory to help explain their journey and promote their journey. Because again, it's not just, some of these journeymen could be teachers. Some of the journeymen could be, they could have other things going on in their life. They just really like to fight. And there's nothing wrong with that. But on BoxRec, when you look at a guy who's 4-10 fighting someone who's 6-1, he's just a sandbag that's been thrown there. Well, no, he's a teacher. He's got 3 kids. He's got, those are the stories that we promote along the way and hope to promote, because they have every bit of a right to have that platform as the guy in what would be considered the A side.
I think people become more emotionally invested when they know the story of that particular fighter, for example. It doesn't matter if they are the prospect or they are the journeyman. I think when people put a bit more context as to how they present these people in the opposite corner, then it does make a difference sometimes. I think, well, not even sometimes, most people like to root for an underdog. I think that's a given fact, isn't it? And I think when you put a story towards a viewer, a fight fan like myself, you actually start to think as a fight fan, well, actually, I might want to see this guy in action.
They have a chance.
Yeah, exactly. They have a chance to potentially do something with this fight.
I'll give you a good example. There was a fight on this past card in Orlando. And there was a kid on the record or on the card who's 1-0. He's a Haitian Olympian, absolute special prospect. His name is Darrell Valsont. They call him Blast. Blast the Champ is what they call him. He was fighting a kid who's 3-6-1. Now, if you look at a 3-6-1, you think, all right, well, he's got to push over. This kid's a prospect. He's going to knock him out in the first round. Well, if you dive into this kid's record, he has only fought undefeated. His name is Del Vecchio Savage. He has only fought undefeated prospects his entire career. Now, that could be a function of poor management. That could be a function of pride, whatever. But he's got 3 wins. So he's knocked out, and all 3 of them were by knockout. So he's knocked out 3 undefeated prospects, took one of them to a draw, and has never been stopped. So this kid comes and he brings it every day. And guess what happened last week or yesterday or the other day, whatever? He didn't get stopped. He didn't get stopped. He banged. He pushed. He prodded, and he didn't come out with the win. But my God, that kid was not going anywhere. And it turns out that he has a very successful electrician job, company on the side where he's doing fine. He just loves the fight, and he shows up in shape. He shows up on time. He's respectful. He's a sportsman, and he will put on a show. And there was a couple upsets that were really exciting on the show too. So they were well matched despite, that was one thing that was most impressive. So we worked with Christy Martin, who's a legend in and of herself, on the last 2 shows. And she cares very much about the product that she delivers. And that is as close to 50-50 as you can possibly get within the confines of the budget and what these A-side fighters are willing to accept. So.
So how is it accessible then, the network, say for people like us in the UK
Yeah.
who might want to catch a lot of these fights? There's a lot of hardcore boxing fans here who will watch any show they can get their eyes
Yeah.
on, basically.
Yeah.
But genuinely, for everybody that listens and who are from different countries other than the USA,
Yep.
how are they able to access that network to be able to watch some of these cards that are being put on?
Yeah. So you can go to the boxingtv.com website to show the schedule. You download the app, which is accessible on or available on IT or Apple TV, Roku, Fire Stick. I mean, every single one. That's Vire. So you download the Vire app, and within that, you'll see live broadcast, which is the Boxing TV. You can go directly to the Boxing TV website link, or you can go through Vire and sign up. And like I said, we have about 30 to 40 shows scheduled already for this year that keep scaling. There's going to be some repackaged broadcasts of fights of the night for the first handful of cards that we do. So you'll be able to catch some awesome fights from these small hall shows. And they're also going to hopefully at some point soon produce Boxing is Love story content. And that's what kind of brings everything together. If you haven't noticed already, I'm very calculated in my approach to getting involved in the sport, and everything needs to connect. And I would just, I wouldn't do something to overextend myself if it didn't have a connection to a previous project. So that's kind of how the evolution of the platform is going to scale. So you can go to bxngtv.com. And download the Vire app, which is available in the UK and 216 other countries, 92 million US households, and on all those devices that you probably have plugged into your TV right now.
So one of the biggest challenges with what you're doing there from that aspect is something we talked about earlier when we talked about a different topic of conversation, i.e. the promotions, the managers. This is another challenge that you're looking to try and overcome, because you're in a market at the moment where there is multiple companies that are trying to do a very similar thing as you. I'm sure you're very well aware of these big companies that are trying to push that type of product out there for people. So I know there'll have been a lot of research that'll have been done before this was all launched, but what sort of challenges do you put in front of yourself to say, right, I know that X, Y, or Z company are producing this sort of level of content within their product. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, and we're going to try and make this different. Are these the sort of thoughts that go through your mind, the sort of thought process that you go through to try and push that out there so that people do get to see this product and the fighters do get that exposure that they're so desperately looking for?
Yeah. So the process that we undertook to kind of develop the proof of concept, or whether or not, almost like a feasibility analysis, is to see who we would directly compete with. And when we identified the space, and we realized that we're not going to compete with, the top ranks or the PBCs, most notably Golden Matchroom, most those level, we looked at our baselines being what is offered the smaller level shows, and we realized that they lacked one big thing, and that is production quality. Well, actually, two big things. So production quality and marketing. And what we provide through our resources is that every promoter who chooses to work with us, there are no upfront production costs, which is not the same in other platforms. So it's a plug and play for other platforms, but they're putting it on the promoter to pay the X amount of dollars for the production crew, the cameras, the lights, audio system, all that stuff. We provide that, and we provide very sophisticated marketing tools by tapping into the social media following of the respective fighters, and we expand on that. And when we generate pay-per-view buys that exceed the cost of productions, that's when we split evenly with the promoter. So there's really no loss that would come out of the promoter's pocket at all. Whereas in other situations, and in most, if not all, they require a certain amount of money upfront for and time to develop and identify a production crew that can execute at this level. Further, and most importantly, because of the frequency of our shows, it's building a following where we have a stable of fighters without really having a stable of fighters.
Yeah.
You know, so there's these guys that would normally do this circuit anyway, that now have a platform. So that's building their profile. And there's little marketing nuances that we do on the show, where instead of like in the when you announce the name of the fighters, instead of just doing the trump colors, we'll put their social media handle on there. We'll have unique brand placement for our sponsors that would show up constantly. We have geo targeting, so if you're a fighter in New York City who has a sponsor whose market's only New York City, they could we can make sure that their logo is only on the NYC broadcast versus the Myrtle Beach or South Carolina broadcast. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in a very calculated manner that diversifies us from what can be done just from a technological standpoint. And that's not, giving any secrets away. That's just the limitations that these other platforms have, that they would have to make a tremendous investment to change what we already have going into it. And we have a very, very skilled team around us to truly execute at the highest level, and a reputation. My partner, Adam Glenn, son of the late Jimmy Glenn, who is one of the biggest boxing names on the planet for a period of time, who his partner, Patrick Winters, also one of the biggest names in the boxing for a period. Both of them over the course of the past year, unfortunately, succumbed to complications with COVID. But Adam Glenn is a brilliant mind. He's a former Harvard attorney that turned to boxing. He's got a great stable of fighters. You have my fighters, you have our networks, you have the Box Raw influence, you have some big names that are within our following that can help kind of broadcast it, that just scales it differently, and we're going to continue to build these relationships as a result.
So you've got a hell of a lot of work to be doing over the next 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it may be. But I suppose you must have absolutely no hours in the day to be able to facilitate a lot of downtime, because I know someone in your position, I know working in the media aspect of things, you don't get a lot of downtime. You're always thinking, there's always something going on up here, and you're always thinking about what can we do next, or what can we move forward with. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, I know the journey that you've been on, you've explained it so brilliantly through the course of our conversation. But what sort of levels has it took you to in terms of the experiences that you've had with people that have been involved, or people that you've met through the course of what you've been doing?
So understand that this is coming from somebody who has been a fight fan his entire life. Understand that this started 3 years ago. And I credit Box Raw quite a bit and their reach, their global reach, to allow these opportunities to happen. But I've been fortunate enough to break bread with some of the most influential figures historically in boxing that's ever existed. Without elaborating too much on what the project is, our first expansion site is Tijuana, Mexico. And when we decided that Boxing is Love was going to go global, we knew of maybe 2 people that needed to be involved in order to facilitate that. None more important than Julio Cesar Chavez. And last week I had the opportunity to sit down in his living room and discuss the goals of what we can do in Tijuana. Now, I wish I spoke more Spanish. Humbly, I wish I wasn't as excited and as nervous, but the plans that we have for Tijuana and the project there evolved quickly because they define Boxing as Love in the broadness of Julio Cesar Chavez. He thinks way bigger than most people. So I'll leave it at that. Whether it be him, Bob Arum, Teofimo Lopez, Alex Usyk, Lomachenko was involved for a period of time. Terrence Crawford. Just Zuma Nelson, Ricky Hatton. Some of the biggest names in the sport. And they're all rocking the t-shirt, right? Dillian White posted a photo of him wearing a t-shirt. I met Jaime Munguia the other day. He's wearing a t-shirt. But that aside, that's very cool, right? That's very, very cool to have the biggest names in the world. But at the same time, if they don't care about the mission, I don't care about them, right? They have to be invested. And I've said no to as many big names as I've said yes to, because this isn't a PR stunt for somebody to get out of trouble. Just know that this isn't a vessel to protect your ass from doing dumb stuff outside of the ring. This is to help people. So I'm past the fanboy stuff. I'm past the idea of accommodating these big names that have a bazillion followers just because they got themselves in trouble. If you don't care about the mission, then I have no use for you, because you have to build your own bridges. And I tell all my guys that I am in the business of building a kingdom, and you cannot do it until you start building castles. Yeah. And I'm in the building castles phases of my life right now when it comes to this. And everybody's allowed to have a castle. They just got to make sure that they care about the kingdom and what the kingdom represents.
I think most people that will have listened to this will agree that you certainly say the right things when it comes down to your philosophies on what you want to do with each project that you're involved in. And it's quite obvious to see and hear that you're really passionate about everything that you do. And it isn't just, as you rightly pointed out, it isn't just a PR stunt. It isn't just to get claim to fame. This is all about the people, the human beings that are all at the forefront of this, the people that you're trying to help, which are the fighters, which are the people in the underprivileged countries that need that support, even just to bring them out of that situation that they're in. And you've said a few things to me that I've observed during the course of the conversation. I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is someone who genuinely is got no other agenda other than what he's delivering in the conversation, which is absolutely, for me personally, being around it for so long, is refreshing to see. And I'm pretty sure everybody that's listened to it will totally agree. And it's nice to hear how you're not putting yourself first, you're putting everybody else before yourself first. And to me, that makes a difference. And I think for a lot of other people that listen, I think they're going to feel the same. And I'd be surprised to find anybody that will say anything the other, because I think what you've done is you've give everybody here what you are all about, what your journey's been, how it affects you on a personal level, and what your ambitions and goals are going forward with each individual project, and how everything is all connected, how it isn't just I have got my fingers in this pie and I've got my fingers in this pie. It is all interlinked together to bring this one sort of fabulous production going forward for yourself. It's been great. I've really, really thoroughly enjoyed having you on to have this conversation. If there's any final words or final mission statements that you want to put out here, this is the time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a genuine discussion with the genuine meaning, and I have been taught at a very young age that I would much rather choose the harder right than the easier wrong. And I have a 7-year-old daughter that looks at her daddy like he hung the moon. And if I deviated from this mission in any capacity, it's going to affect that. And I would much rather her remember, if I were to die tomorrow, for her to remember me by the way I love and who and how I love, versus the mountains of money that I leave her. And by virtue of hard work and grit, I'm going to see this to the end, and I'm going to reach the goals for those that trust in me. And I just ask that you continue, and your viewers to continue to follow the journey of Boxing is Love. You can find us on at Boxing is Love Official. You can follow on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram at j.scalzo. Check out our next broadcast, which is scheduled for March 20th on Boxing TV. And please continue to follow the journey, because there's going to be very cool stories that are going to come as a result of this. And I appreciate, Sean, you and your platform to allow me to tell my story. And I'll be here if you have any follow-up questions, and anyone out there that wants to help, just send a message. I'm extremely accessible.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Genuinely, I've really enjoyed having this
Cheers.
conversation with you, and
Likewise.
you've given all the social media handles. I don't even have to ask you to do that because you've done a great job of doing that. So, if anybody wants to follow your journey, wants to follow the platform's journey, wants to even follow the fighters' journey that you're a part of their careers, then they can do that. They can check all this out on social media. You've given them all the handles. One more time, it's a pleasure and a privilege, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. Best of luck to you.
The dream is made real.